Hello, and welcome to the Buildings of Tomorrow podcast. My name is Hajar, and I'll be your host. Today, we are diving into the increasingly important topic of building modernization. Siemens has recently conducted a market research to uncover valuable insights into modernization strategies. And with me to discuss the findings is Jon Lester, who brings a wealth of expertise on the subject. Hi, Jon, how are you?
Hey, Joe, I'm well, thanks. And thanks so much for having me. I'm excited because normally I sit where you sit, but now I'm sitting on the other side, still behind the microphone, but I'm excited. Bring it on.
Jon, let's start with the basics. What do we mean when we talk about building modernization? Explain it in plain language for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about modernization, it's about upgrading and replacing the technology, the operational technology within a building and bringing in the latest and greatest, the most recent innovations that then start to deliver that additional functionality. So modernization is around changing and upgrading the building and its control systems to the latest systems.
And give us a bit of context here as to this market research, what prompted it, and what were you looking to uncover?
Yeah, so like modernization has always been a really important topic across our industry. Of course, depending on the system, every 5 or 10 years, systems tend to need to require some kind of modernization. But one of the things that we see at the moment in the industry is firstly, innovation and the adoption of technology across the building and construction industry is accelerating. So things are getting faster. That means the difference between technology today and 10 years ago is much bigger than it was perhaps 10 years ago and the 10 years before that. So things are getting faster. Technology is changing. The expectations and the requirements of customers are also changing. So one of the reasons, while this has always been an important topic, one of the reasons we wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive was firstly because of that speed, and also with that speed, the whole industry is struggling a little bit more to understand how do we do this well, how do we bring those new technologies in, what should we consider, and how do we manage that. And that's a really interesting and important topic for us to kind of facilitate and understand at a deeper level.
Mhm. Indeed, it's taking a lot of the limelight out there. But when we talk about the risks, right, we hear more about it, but there are also risks of not modernizing, right? What are those?
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about why would you modernize. So of course it's not just the latest bells and whistles. It's not the just new functionality, because of course all the systems that we've had within the industry over the last decades are all quite capable. That those risks continue. So there's operational risks, protecting the continuity of your operation. You need to make sure that the systems you have are maintainable, that you can get spare parts, that you can find expertise in the industry that can support those systems. Um, and those operational risks kind of expand more and more, as I said, as connectivity becomes more of a thing. Integration across systems is now standardized. Topics like cybersecurity, et cetera, start to become more important. So again, you go back 10 or 15 years, maybe cybersecurity was a consideration, but not really at the top of the list. Today, we see that that's more and more important as we start to step into this next generation of technologies. So that's there. And then, of course, there's financial risk. There's regulatory requirements. There's compliance. I take the example of the EU, and you have some expectations around reporting your carbon footprint, your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, etc. Systems from a decade ago weren't designed with those in mind. So you have those operational risks that you have to consider, and then you have additional to that financial or compliance risks that you need to manage. And modernization is a great way to kind of maintain and keep yourself in the right space for those areas.
Mm. You mentioned regulatory pressure. You mentioned also cybersecurity risks. You mentioned operational risks, and I'm assuming also efficiency, the desire for building owners to have their building more efficient. But are there other events, other factors that trigger organization to take action and really start the modernization process? Or
Yeah, well, like you mentioned one there. So of course there's those risks of keeping the lights on, let's call it. Then of course you have those expectations. We know that we can operate buildings more effectively today with our latest technology. So there's additional benefits in energy savings, in operational savings. So there's an upside to modernizing, not just minimizing risk. So it's a little bit of that balance of minimizing that risk, finding and realizing those additional on top benefits and values, whether that's for the owner and operator of the building or the customers. Again, we know so much more now about controlling indoor air quality, delivering the right light level and warmth, delivering more seamless workflows and workspaces for people, new technologies, new systems that you would implement during a modernization process have more capabilities in this space as well. So there's a lot of those triggers that go out there. Of course, from a business perspective, they tend to be quite unique, depending on the business, depending on the company, the goals that they're trying to achieve. There'll be different targets, but what we see from the research is certainly systems systems are expected to be more integrated, and that's a focus of a lot of our modern systems that wasn't such previously. So that drive for integration, that drive for data and data product, and collecting that information and enabling other technologies is so much higher today. So it's one of those key drivers. We talked about regulation, but it's not just regulation. When we talk about ESG and sustainability goals, also a lot of companies have their own net zero goals. They have their own expectations and goals that they've set themselves. And it's difficult to achieve that with some of the technologies from yesterday. And then a whole list of those other things depending on the customer. So, is the maintenance cost too high or challenging? Are they getting the support from their vendors that they want today? Do they want to find other suppliers that can maybe provide the service that they expect? Is the system even able to achieve what they're looking to achieve? Does the performance meet the expectations? And again, we touched on it before, but labor. Labor shortage is a topic in general in our industry. It's harder and harder to find skilled labor who really have the understanding of the mechanical and electrical systems and the control systems that govern them. Not only that, if you're talking about a system that might be 15 or 20 years old, you also have to find someone who knows that system and understands how it works.
Hmm.
And obviously, the new talent coming into our industry don't have that legacy capability and knowledge. So there's also that risk of bringing in newer technologies that come with all those benefits to mitigate all those risks, but also then have the opportunity to be operated by the next generation of talent and skilled staff in our industry that don't rely or don't hold the legacy knowledge that might be required for those older systems.
Hmm. So it's a mix of triggers, right? It's internal pain point, external pressure, as you've just explained.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely, and it depends on those systems as well. Of course, you in a building you have many different systems. You have a fire safety system, which is life critical. There's a lot of regulation that you need to comply with, and at the same time, those regulations don't change quickly. So you might be okay if you have a fully functioning system from 10 years ago.
mhm,
You might be okay for the next few years, but then other systems around ESG and sustainability, certainly throughout the research, we found that those systems around energy management and sustainability management, decarbonisation, reporting and insights, they're in a regulatory space that's changing really significantly and has changed really significantly over the last years. So they're the ones that are under the highest pressure, even though in many cases they might be some of the newer systems. They might only be 2 or 3 years old, but actually the landscape and that they're operating in has changed so much in those 2 or 3 years. The functionality still might not be there, and that drives modernisation decisions. So depending on the customer requirements and their goals, and then also depending on the individual system within the building, those drivers, that balance that you talked about between operational, risk, regulatory, staffing and labor, etc., they all change. And that starts to move some systems to the top and of the list and some systems further down.
exactly. I mean, I was about to ask you, is there a building system in particular that usually is most impacted by modernization?
Yeah, it's tough. Like I wouldn't say most impacted because all of them will need some kind of modernization eventually. But what we do see is that some systems are updated and modernized more often and some less. So I gave a few examples there. The fire safety systems we certainly see are modernized have a longer life cycle, modernize less regularly, and that is sometimes 10 years plus. Those sustainability and decarbonisation systems, ESG, energy management systems in this very dynamic kind of energy world are getting modernised more regularly, closer to 3 to 5 years. And in the middle, and one of the biggest sources of those risk and challenges around the building management, building automation systems, they tend to be in that 5 to 8 year phase. So depending on the system, those things all shift and change. And then as the requirements around or the challenges and risks around cybersecurity or energy and regulatory compliance raise or fall, we see more. But that's certainly the trend that we're seeing in the market today.
Mhm. You touched a bit on risks and cybersecurity. I think it's obvious that modernization can help reduce these risks of cyber attacks. Can you tell us how and what systems are most vulnerable?
Yeah, hey, cybersecurity is a tough topic because no one system is cybersecure. It's about that really complete cybersecurity approach from a business, from a building perspective, and that goes from physical security and training the staff and the users of the building through to the actual technology itself. What I'd say in general is we talked about some of the benefits that we see and the need for integration, and that need is absolutely growing and will continue to grow. So the expectation, no matter what the system is, that integration is quite high. The data that systems create, they want to share it across systems. They don't want to be siloed. They don't want to be disconnected. And that data is extremely important for AI-enabled systems, for common data environment use cases, digital twins, etc. So certainly what we see in a general trend across all systems is that integration and the sharing of information and data between those systems has grown. And of course, that comes with an expansion in kind of attack surface, in expansion of cybersecurity risk. But that goes hand in hand. So I wouldn't say that there's any particular system. So certainly that the more integrated, the higher the risk and the more critical. So any system that is really critical to operation, and that comes then down to the use of the building. Is it a hospital? Is it a data center? Is it a manufacturing facility? All of those critical operations that have a serious impact on business continuity and business operation, then that risk is magnified, regardless of the system. But what I'd also say is that the capabilities and the understanding of cybersecurity and how we can better design systems, deploy systems, manage and maintain systems with cybersecurity in mind is also increasing. So the risks are growing, but also our capabilities and knowledge as an industry are also growing. And I think that, again, maybe sometimes I forget it's 2026 already, but maybe you go back 20 years and cybersecurity wasn't a topic at the top of the list. It absolutely is now. And all of these systems, whether it's through a modernization process or just a standard deployment, cybersecurity is always top of mind through the design, deployment, and maintenance process.
Mhm. So it's clear the need to modernize is urgent, is necessary, but comes with it also a number of barriers, challenges, right? So we mentioned a few of them earlier, but what are the common blockers?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I guess from the first half of the conversation, you'd say, "Oh, great, modernization's amazing. Let's just modernize." But it's actually a really complex process. When you compare modernization to installing a new system in a greenfield building, so when you're building a new building and you deploy new technology, here you have the opportunity to design everything from scratch, and you have all of the devices and all of the network set up, and all of the wiring and cabling and network considerations, connectivity, etc., built into the design, baked into the design. So everything is, at least on day one, ideal for the systems as they're designed. Modernization is different. Of course, you've got buildings who are that are 10, 20, 50, 100 years old. And especially when you look in those older buildings, it's not so easy. And in some cases, it's not even allowed to drill holes in the wall, to drag new wires, to create, the new requirements from a baseline perspective to deploy these new technologies. And And that's just the actual deployment. Before you even start talking about undertaking modernization, there's a lot of understanding that you need to gather. You need to really understand what you have installed already today. What is that system? What does it do? How does it work? Who programmed it? How does the program work? Is the program fit for purpose? How many controllers and devices and different pieces of that system exist? And then once you've understand that, you've done that audit, then you have to start to talk about, okay, what is the goal of the future? What are we trying to achieve? How do we then go and achieve that? What's that going to cost? What's the return on investment going to look like? How do we get funding for that? How long is it going to take? How is it going to disrupt the people within the building? So that's another big thing. You can imagine you've people working in an office and people are drilling holes in the roof. This doesn't facilitate the operation of the building itself, right through to then actually taking the action, making a decision and going through there. So there's a lot of challenges and barriers around just the complexity of the procurement process, the long tail of preparation that we have within modernization projects, understanding, and you can imagine through this long process, and I mentioned a few of those different phases, different stakeholders have different stake in the game, and at some point you are going to run into your finance colleagues, your IT and technology colleagues, who are all going to have different questions about this modernization. How is this going to affect the system? What considerations like cybersecurity have been taken? The finance colleagues are going to want to understand, how much is this going to cost? How much is this going to cost ongoing? What's the return on investment going to be? And also there's going to be a lot of challenge, because remember, a lot of systems are still working to some extent when you undertake a modernization. So there's a regular question that you get through that kind of finance and justification phase is, why do we need to spend this money? What we have works fine. Like, what's the problem? Why do we need to do this? So there's kind of this challenge of building a business case internally for the companies that drive modernization to help explain to those different stakeholders through the process, why do we modernize? What are the risks that we're addressing and we're trying to minimize or avert? What's the on-top value that we can deliver? What are the cost savings, operational savings, energy savings that we can deliver or improve to user experience? And then what's that return on investment, and what's the disruption to daily business? So all of those questions have to be answered, and that's one of the biggest barriers. It's just painful, or it can be painful, and that's one of those topics that makes a modernization conversation difficult. And also, what we see in the research is that that's one of the things that push people back from actually undertaking the process. They know they need to modernize. They know they've got problems. These systems can't do what they want them to do. They're struggling to get the service that they want. They've got 100 manual workarounds that they've created to try and bridge the gap between what their system does today and what they actually need it to do on a daily basis. But undertaking the modernization process can be such a challenge that they put it off. It's a next year problem. Exactly. It's the year after problem. And that's one of the big things that we see. So you see this disruption, you see the challenge, you see the risk that comes with it, the stakeholders, the need to really build that business plan, or to build that really clear idea of return on investment and total cost of ownership of undertaking modernization. All of those things kind of create this wave, or this barrier of entry that then ultimately push modernization projects back in the priority list. And then, of course, what we see is the less time you have to actually modernize before an issue becomes critical, the worse it is. And I think, at some point we'll dive into a little bit of that. What are the do's and don'ts? Certainly one of the don'ts is don't put it off until the system explodes, because then you're really in trouble. That's when you have to really start risking cost, risking disruption, and risking extreme challenge from a modernization process.
So part of tackling the modernization process is really to have an in-depth understanding of the complexity and the management and the risks and the disruptions. But I am assuming also there are ways, as you said, there are ways to minimize these impacts, and one of them is also not to rush into the project. But give us some great examples of how to minimize impact for
Yeah,
ongoing operations.
all these things can be managed, absolutely. So it's like any complex project, having some transparency, having a good plan, finding a great partner, a technically capable partner who's done this before that can help you walk through that process, can even help you kind of develop that level of understanding around the return on investment, making those key decisions. Where should you start? Where should you go? Stepwise approaches to things. That's absolutely capable and possible. And I think that's, when we talk about making this real, undertaking modernization, that'd be one of the biggest do's that we'd say is find that partner that you have trust in, that has a good experience driving these topics, that understands the technical challenge of the integration and the shift itself, and get them involved as early as you can, so they can support with that kind of auditing process at the beginning. They can support with defining, what is the outcome, what's the end goal from a technical perspective, what's the system that they're looking for, and also support developing that return on investment, total cost of ownership, and disruption clarity, so that the internal process can run more smoothly. And also you then are modernizing with time. And I struggle to think a little bit of a bad analogy, but maybe if you own your car and the engine light comes on, and no one wants to go and get their car serviced. That's no fun. That's expensive. That's time consuming. But if you continue to put it off, maybe it doesn't break in a day. Maybe it doesn't break in a month. Maybe it doesn't break in a year. But at some point, the system won't just stop not working perfectly. It might stop working altogether. And then you're in real trouble. Then you're stuck on the side of the road, and the disruption is much bigger. So it'd be a bit of an analogy from that perspective.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. No matter how challenging these processes are, certainly one of the experiences that we have, and one of the biggest recommendations we give to our customers when we talk about it, is don't put it off until it's urgent. Don't put it off until you have to take decisive, urgent action on modernization, because that is more costly, more disruptive, more challenging in general. Better to have a plan, better to have a structure, better to work with a partner to really scope out what happens in the next couple of years, because a lot of these systems also, they can leverage, they can work in tandem together. They can, there's backward compatibility. So you can start, and I'll take the example of building automation systems. You can start replacing a switchboard at a time, a controller at a time, a floor on your building at a time. And if you can do that in a stepwise manner, in a controlled and planned and scheduled manner, it's way less disruptive and way more controllable, and also opens up new ideas and flexible ways of how you can fund that. It can start to become part of your operational expenditure. It doesn't have to be a big capital outlay. It can start to, opens up for other discussions around kind of new technology and metering as a service, modernization as a service, and different flexible ways to do that. Because while those ideas have been around, certainly what we saw with the research as well, in a vast majority of cases, that's not used. People still end up at the stage where they have a large capital investment, and they have a time-critical modernization, rather than a structured, organized, and stepwise approach to that process.
Thank you, Jon. This all the great advice on how to tackle modernization, right? What approaches work best to create a compelling case that wins team's approval?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, every customer's got their own goals. So I guess a good business case always starts with understanding what matters to the goals. And here I talk about, when we tend to talk modernization, the key stakeholders, or the key people within the organization, the customer organization that we're talking about, tend to be the operational teams, the maintenance teams, the facility management teams. And they're only undertaking this because they know it needs to happen. So they're always an internal advocate. And at different phases of the project, they have influence to be able to move things forward and make decisions. But importantly, they're always going to have to onboard those technical colleagues, like your CTO or CIO, so your IT colleagues. You're going to have to onboard your finance colleagues and get funding for this effort. And what facilitates that is understanding what's important to the business and making good decisions. So it's not just about modernizing everything for modernization's sake. It's not about adding every bell and whistle because that's what's available. It's picking the right things that will add the most value for the business, that then make those business cases like return on investment, like total cost of ownership, like minimizing disruption, the most compelling for those conversations through the procurement process. So I think that's certainly the biggest advice that we give there is having a really clear idea about what are we trying to achieve, how does that effort support the business goals, putting it in the context of the business goals of that company or that customer, and then try to continue to work with the teams through that process and flesh out those return on investment pictures and understand where should they put their money, where should they not, where's the highest impact and the highest value.
John, let's be even more concrete now. For listeners managing a building or building portfolio, what's the one practical step they should take, say, next week or in the near future to kickstart modernizing their building?
Maybe I'll give you two if that's all right. One is simple, but two makes my life easier at the very least. First would be find a partner, find a vendor, find a company, in your scope of suppliers or in the industry who has the skills, the knowledge, has the capabilities to be able to walk you through and support you through this process. That's extremely essential. I think what we see and what we saw from the research is that often vendors aren't engaged until the last stage, which is basically we now know what we're doing. We're going to look for people who deliver the solution we've decided upon, which is fine. But then you've walked this whole journey through the life cycle assessment, through the review and the auditing, through developing specifications, through trying to get this into budget validation and through all the internal cycles. That means the internal team has done all of that themselves. And that's really challenging. So what I'd say is at that life cycle assessment, at that auditing phase, get a partner involved who can help not just do the work through that process, but also help design a solution, help deliver information to establish that return on investment and business case understanding, who can support through those conversations and give confidence around the capabilities that partner might have, the use cases or the previous reference cases where they've done something similar in the same part of the world that have shown great benefits. All of those things are great proof points to help move that process. So that would be number one. Long story short, to get that partner, find that partner and get them involved early. Early is better. And then the last one, I just quickly mentioned that process, the life cycle assessment, the auditing, the internal reviews, the developing specifications and designing a system, budget, internal, that just takes time. So the second piece of advice would be to look at your systems, understand what you have, at least at a high level, understand which ones are the most critical and start today. Don't wait till next year. Don't wait till the year after, because the less time you have, all of those steps still have to be undertaken. So it's like anything. I've been doing some study recently, and I'm a terrible student, and I don't get my assignments done until the last minute, and I don't start working on them until the last minute, and that creates stress, that creates challenge, and that makes something that should be relatively simple more difficult. And it's no different here. The longer you have and the better planning you have over that kind of 3 to 5 to 7 year time frame to understand which systems will need to be modernized when, and starting that process as early as possible gives you time, gives you flexibility, gives you the capability to walk through that complex procurement process and make it as seamless as possible, and gives you the opportunity to try some of those new business models like I talked about, doing things in a stepwise manner, trying different as a service models, shifting cost from CapEx to OpEx, and just make this whole challenging process less challenging and less painful.
Indeed. All right. Thanks a lot, John, for the fantastic insights into building modernization, why it matters, how to approach it, and how to get it right. So, for our listeners, if you are inspired to take action, remember this: modernization is not just about upgrading systems, it's about future proofing your buildings for long term success. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you,
And,
Haja.
and thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of Buildings of Tomorrow podcast. Until next time.